What's up, wrestling fans, trading card collectors? Welcome to another episode of Wrestling with Cards. Today we've got Kyle from the Wax Museum on the show. For those of you who may be unfamiliar with Kyle or the Wax Museum, it is a basketball card-focused podcast. And you may be asking, what the heck does basketball have to do with wrestling cards? Well, the way that Kyle approaches and views the hobby from the basketball card side, I think could really help the wrestling card side, which is why I wanted to get him onto the show for an interview. But not only does Kyle talk about basketball cards, he's also been known to drop some wrestling card terminology and knowledge sprinkled in throughout his episodes. And we've also seen Kyle post some wrestling pictures that he was either at the events at or in the picture on his social media feeds. And then this begs the question, does Kyle secretly collect wrestling cards? We're going to find that out in today's episode and much more. But before we do that, just a few reminders of how you can help show your support for my content. The easiest thing you can do, and it's free, hit that subscribe button. If you're digging my other videos or this video so far, I know we just started, but if you're liking it, give me a like. If you like Kyle and the Wax Museum, give me a like. Share this episode with all of your friends if they're into sports cards, basketball, wrestling, wrestling cards, anything related to the hobby. Copy this link, share it on social media, send it in a text message or an email to a friend. Get more people involved with the community. If you would like to listen to more wrestling card content in audio form, check out the Wrestling with Cards podcast, which is kind of a complimentary to these videos. There's some things I'll talk about there that I don't hear and vice versa, so you want to check out that as well as this channel. And of course, the Worlds Collide podcast. Myself and Tony Vella, two OGs in the wrestling card content space, getting together to talk about all things wrestling cards. Links to both of those podcasts in the show notes. They're available on all popular podcast platforms as well, so please subscribe to those. Tell a friend about the shows and subscribe and leave a review. If you would like to help contribute to my content monetarily, links are below to the Wrestling with Cards Patreon community page, where for as little as $1 a month, you can have your name in the credits of these videos. You can even pay a higher tier, request video topics, come on the show, be a member of the booking committee, kind of steer the direction of the content, as well as exclusive videos on that page as well. Links also below to my eBay store, links to my social platforms, and of course the donation links if you'd like to buy me a caffeinated beverage. Usually I say coffee, but it could be a Bang. It could be 50 cents, which would probably buy me a Diet Coke or Diet Dr. Pepper, which I'm all for. Taste of Diet Dr. Pepper. So real quick, at the last minute today, I found out that Kyle was going to be broadcasting from parts unknown. And as we know, the Wi-Fi in parts unknown is spotty at best. So we're going to have really good audio quality today from him, but he will not be on video. And as for myself, well, I've got some business to take care of, so I am actually headed out right now. That being said, I did find a really good friend of mine that's going to be able to assist with the video today, and for many of you wrestling fans of yesteryear, you're going to know this guy. Enjoy the video.
Get him on out of the parking lot. Hey, look out! Whoa!
What's up, everybody? Midnight Rider here, special guest on this show today with another special guest, probably even more of a special guest, Kyle from the Wax Museum podcast. What's up, man?
Thanks for having me on the show. I'm excited to do something a little bit different than what I would normally do.
Same here. This channel most of the time has the same circle of wrestling fans, and we decided to get out of the box a little bit. And I know there are a lot of closet wrestling fans. I'm not saying you are, because we see some of your posts, but there are a lot of closet wrestling fans out there. So just give everybody a brief introduction of yourself and what you do, because I think some of the audience here may not know who you are.
All right. So my name's Kyle, and I host the Wax Museum podcast, which started in March of 2019. And it focuses specifically on basketball cards. So the tagline is all things past, present, and future. So that's what I really try and hone in on. I know there are a lot of general card podcasts that talk about a lot of different topics in sports, which, I listen to those, I'm into those, but I felt like we needed another good, very basketball focused show. So that's what I've tried to do, and done a lot of work with RPAs and with patch investigations. And I'm a diehard Indiana Pacers fan. So that's really, if you listen to the show, that's going to come out. I try not to make it too Pacers centric, but it's there. It's in your face. I'm sorry.
Honestly, that's two of the things that I've seen you talk about that are going to relate really into wrestling as we get into this conversation. And speaking of wrestling, everybody's wondering, why did I bring on a basketball guy? I've been telling everybody forever, there are a lot of wrestling fans out there who just aren't as in the weeds in it as some of us. So I'm just going to give you the floor to talk about your history with wrestling, and we can kind of jump off from there.
All right. So I will say, feel free, cut in whenever you need to.
Okay.
Interrupt me, correct dates. I'll try to be as thorough as I can here. But
hey, as long as we're talking about nostalgia and fun, no need to be corrected on things.
All right. Well, I am a guy for the facts, so I know it bothers me when
Sure.
I listen to people that have stuff wrong. So forgiveness from all your listeners if I get something wrong here. But so my parents were actually not really into wrestling. The extent of their wrestling background was that my mom, because I grew up in the Midwest, my mom saw Dick the Bruiser once.
Nice.
And her brother, which would be my uncle, threw up during the women's match. So, which, that was a big deal then. Of course, this was probably the 60s. So that was a big deal then. She also mentioned another name, that he fought a guy named Angelo Poffo, which wasn't a big deal to her. And it wasn't a big deal to me when I was younger, but eventually I came to appreciate that even more. And mom gained some cool points. Right. But anyway, parents were not into wrestling. So, I had some Hulk Hogan stuff when I was little, just because it was more cultural than actual, being a wrestling fan. It's just, he was everywhere. So I had the Hulk Hogan t-shirt, but I didn't get much into wrestling until middle school. And that was, of course, the Attitude Era. I'm 34, so there are probably a lot of listeners that are in that same range. But I got into it because of the Attitude Era. There were a series of things that really got me into it. Of course, you couldn't go to school without seeing the NWO shirts and everything. So that was all around me all the time. Kids on the bus were playing with their wrestling figures, or bringing them, and it was a big deal. So that kind of got me hooked. And I didn't have cable at the time, so I actually gravitated toward WCW Worldwide.
Oh yeah, because it was like syndicated. Yeah, they would just be on the local shows.
Saturday mornings on WTTV4 in Indiana. I watched WCW Worldwide. They had highlights of like Raw and Nitro, but only pictures from the pay-per-views, which I was really disappointed about. And then that means there was always a match at the end. So I saw a lot of Disco Inferno and Norman Smiley, and those kind of Lash LaRue, maybe. I think it was that time frame. So I saw a lot of those kind of guys. And also my mom was like, well, she was correct in thinking that wrestling was way too raunchy at that time for a kid my age. So I convinced her, I don't know if this is necessarily true or not. I convinced her that WCW was clean, was like the edited version. Kind of, but I was able to use that angle as a kid, because I also knew I had access to Worldwide. So it's like, all right, I'll do that, and I'll use that as my way in. And my cousins introduced me to WCW NWO Revenge on the 64, which just blew my mind. I'm like, I have to have something like this. I actually ended up getting a PlayStation, saved up my money, bought a PlayStation, and I bought the WCW Thunder game, because that was the current one at the time. I think, that was a tough choice, because the Nitro game was $20. Thunder game was $40, which was a big deal at the time. So, I ended up with Thunder. So that actually, I had a lot of exposure to wrestling through video games, whereas I couldn't always watch it on TV. So it's like, I felt very connected to it, although I wasn't always watching it. But eventually, though, we did get cable, which was a big breakthrough in my house in early 1999. So I got it just in time, and it was in the basement too, which was a big deal. I got it just in time for some really horrible WCW stuff is very nostalgic to me, though. Like, I remember watching Dustin Rhodes come out as Seven.
Yes.
I remember all the Jeff Jarrett stuff. I remember just a lot of weird, goofy stuff, but I was totally into it. And I didn't, some of these guys, like when Mike Awesome would come over, I didn't know who Mike Awesome was. I didn't watch ECW. So I've learned about all that in retrospect, and it's been a lot of fun. But anyway, 1999 came around. We got cable. That was a huge shock to me. I also discovered, like, hey, these two shows are on at the same time. So if I say I'm watching Nitro, then maybe Raw will end up on at the same time too. and dad was a little more lenient with that than maybe mom was. But then the Radicals showed up on Raw, and I was like just super confused because I'm not reading dirt sheets as a 11-year-old or whatever. Sure. So anyway, I kind of worked my way, started watching some WWF. The invasion angle was I was excited at the idea of it, and then it just wasn't executed well. I didn't understand why all the top talent wasn't showing up. Of course, I know now.
Right.
That kind of killed wrestling for me, though. Like I was gone from wrestling, and then it wasn't cool anymore.
Sure.
I was gone from wrestling by the time Cena showed up. So it'd probably be somewhere in 2001.
Yeah, early 2000s. Yeah.
So then absolutely nothing for me on the wrestling front for probably 6 or 7 years. And then in college in 2007, I met a friend who was obsessed with wrestling. And we gave him a hard time because that wasn't, honestly, that wasn't normal in college. Sure, we were obsessed with other things, not wrestling.
Right.
He wanted to be a wrestler. Nonetheless, so, he was our friend. So we supported him. He had all the DVDs. He had everything. Well, we're in Central Florida, or I had moved to Central Florida by that time. And he said, hey, this thing called TNA tapes close to us, so let's go. And I said, I don't know. And he's like, yeah, Sting's going to be there. All right, I'll be there.
Nice.
So that was my selling point: Sting, Kevin Nash, Kurt Angle, because I did watch some WWF in that range when after they had moved on. So we went to, I think our first show we ended up going to 2 or 3. Our first one was TNA Genesis 2007, which I think King Booker T debuted there, but also was the debut of Relic, which if your listeners know is killer spelled backwards, as Mike Tna would tell you nonstop. So I saw Relic pop out of his wooden crate or whatever that was. I saw Black Rain, spill all the mouse traps for the House of Horrors match or whatever they called it. It was just a colossal mess, and I loved it. I didn't watch a lot of TNA on TV after that, but I kind of loosely followed it because I had some connection. And, there was a point where like Samoa Joe was, at my feet in the crowd where he like went over the guardrail. So it was, we were pretty close to the action there. And then I bought into a pay-per-view with my friend, and it was Turning Point, and Scott Hall no-showed, and that kind of killed that for me too then. So it's just like, well, all that momentum has kind of dwindled down. So from then I followed significant events. I remember TNA trying the Monday Night Wars, which I'm like, hey, I'll at least tune into it, because it's nostalgic. They got my views. And then I read an article around 2011 about this wrestler named CM Punk, and how he was like holding the belt hostage, how he was at Wrigley. And I'm like, this storyline is fantastic. I don't know who, I'm trying to think of it. Maybe it was David Shoemaker that wrote the article. I don't know if he was writing then, but it was enough to get me to like start paying attention. I think that's when I joined, and that's about when it started, Squared Circle on Reddit, because I'm like, you know what? I really don't want to invest the time to watch this show, but this CM Punk guy is like captivating, this whole saga. It's like, it actually seems realistic. So I kind of followed with just on Squared Circle. So I knew the storylines, but still didn't jump in. And then about 2015, just like with TNA, I had a friend who was into NXT. Well, NXT was running house shows at like armories that were like 20 minutes away from me. I at one point, Enzo like hit his head on the ceiling tiles and busted it out. That's how small these venues were. So I went to some NXT shows with a buddy of mine, saw a lot of, big names now. And that was fun. We mingled with some of the wrestlers afterwards, like Baron Corbin. I never in my wildest dreams thought his character would make it. But he was just the nicest guy. So these guys were really cool. So anyway, I did that for a while, and I decided to get some autographs of those guys too, because I was doing that with minor league baseball. It was the same friend that was connected to that. So then we did the wrestling together. So I kind of got into it. Yeah. I kind of got into it a little bit there, but and I think I even went to a Raw show at one point. But from then it's been kind of storylines. I went to a Ring of Honor taping. That was a lot of fun. Kind of stayed away from wrestling other than Squared Circle because I just love it's like nostalgia, just nonstop. I'm huge on nostalgia. So I do, I could probably tell you what's going on from time to time, just from seeing all the headlines and reading there. And then AEW came around, and I did not like AEW at the start. I didn't like Cody. I didn't like the Young Bucks. I hated all the choreographed, dancing. I'm just not a big fan of that at all. And I do listen to some Cornette podcasts, so that might have influenced it a little bit as well. But I wasn't into it. But then when Bryan Danielson and CM Punk came back, I actually watched my first wrestling telecast in years, for the Punk debut, especially. Sure. And
that was huge. I haven't seen a pop like that in a long time.
Yeah, and the fact that like Sting's there and they're using him well, and they really respect the history there. So I would say I casually follow AEW, but I don't really watch it on TV. Maybe 10 or 20 minutes here and there, but that's kind of where I'm at today. So hopefully I didn't bore your listeners there, but that's my wrestling history.
That's some interesting stories that aren't exactly the same, classic ways that many of us got into wrestling. Just kind of some jumping off points. Like, are you keeping up with AEW, or do you keep up with the Squared Circle? Does that keep you up with some of the other indie feds and WWE? Like, so are you kind of keeping track of everything at a distance? That's kind of what I do, because we're both putting out content, and we're both in the hobby, which we're going to talk about, because that's mainly why everyone's here. But it's time consuming, especially when you've got hundreds of promotions out there. And it's not like it was in the 90s where, I actually kept track of a lot of stuff in the 90s with magazines. I discovered, what's this thing called independent wrestling with these, these people holding shows in barns in the middle of Tennessee. And I'm just like, this is amazing to me. So it's awesome that, social media or Reddit, YouTube highlights, stuff like that, we're able to keep track of a lot of this stuff. So I'm assuming, like you said, you're still keeping up with some things, at least a little bit, because I don't know about you, but like me, like once I was into wrestling, no matter, like, as you said, you come and go, but you're never completely out of it.
Right. Yeah. And I think for a while I had kind of a negative slant toward independence, because when I was in middle school and high school, the backyard federations were a big deal, and those were kind of pathetic. At least I will say, at least the ones I was exposed to. So I'm like, I don't know about this, but yeah, actually, at one point I mentioned MLW to someone, and they're like, MLW. I'm like, yeah, I saw it on Reddit. I haven't watched a show, but I feel like I am able to keep up with this stuff, like what Matt Cardona's doing right now.
Yeah. That's it for me this year. Yeah.
Yeah. And then seeing that he's a collector too, it's like, wait a second, maybe I need to pay more attention to, Zack Ryder, which I wasn't for the longest time. But he's definitely earned my respect, and with the death match. So yeah, I feel like I'm fairly plugged in. Like, I don't want to, say that I follow it hardcore, but I feel like I'm probably plugged in more than the average person, especially considering I don't watch wrestling. It's weird. Yeah. I tell people, oh, no, I don't watch that. But I have, a lot of surface knowledge of it right now.
Do you think there are a lot of people, as we kind of transition into hobby talk, this is my kind of angle at it. I think there are a lot of people out there that don't want to talk about it because it's kind of like taboo to admit you're a wrestling fan. But they either were an Attitude Era, maybe they were an 80s kid with Hulkamania, maybe they were a little bit younger and they grew up with Cena. Like, I think there are a lot of wrestling fans out there who just don't want to admit it publicly.
I think there are, and it's the same stigma that goes with card collecting. Yes. And, I try and what I try and do, instead of shying away from it, and it took me a while to do this, but, I host a card podcast, so I have to.
Right.
But I try to normalize collecting as much as I can. And it's easy if you put it in context for people where they're at, like your coworker that goes and hugs mascots at Disney, like they can't really fault you for what you're doing, because on the surface, what they're doing seems just as goofy and childish. But for them, there's a nostalgia factor. So once you're able to relate that and explain to them, like, yeah, wrestling's goofy, it's the closest thing. I think it was Xavier Woods that said it's the closest thing to like live Shakespearean theater that we have.
Yep.
Now, unfortunately, a lot of it's not done very well. But when it's done right, it's good. It's excellent entertainment. It's art. It is what it is.
Well, like the CM Punk story that you were talking about, holding the belt hostage. I mean, that's captivating.
Yeah,
And when they do stuff, even if the payoff ends up being a so-so match, and I like to talk about it all the time. I don't care about 6-star matches and flips and kicks. Like, I'm all about stories and characters. And
I don't even remember how that ended, to be honest.
Yeah, see, there you go. Prime example. All right, so let's transition into cards, and we're going to start with some wrestling card talk before we get into a little bit more of your aspect of the hobby. Do you have any wrestling cards?
So I don't have a lot of wrestling cards, unfortunately.
Hey, you have some. That's a good start. If you have one,
some.
That's even good.
Yeah, so I do have some of the, I had some I kept on hand just in case I would run into wrestlers at the time. And then I have some stuff that I got signed. So a couple of the early NXT sets. It wasn't the first year, so I want to say 2015.
Cool.
But that was like the Alexa Bliss rookie, Paige. Well, no, I think Paige might have been the year before. But the second year, the one with Enzo and Cass, I've got almost 2 sets of those signed because I pretty much saw all those guys while they were still at house shows. I even have like Hideo Itami. I've got 2 cards signed from him. It's funny. We joked that one of the wrestlers that somehow escaped me was Bull Dempsey. It's like, how do you lose Bull Dempsey?
Yeah.
But we lost Bull Dempsey. So I don't have those signed, but I almost have 2 sets of those. And then I have a 2020. This is a rare modern buy for me. A 2020 fully loaded matte auto of Seth Rollins.
Cool.
And I liked that one because I'm into historical relics, and that matte in that card is from 2015 SummerSlam. That's where he had the winner takes all match with John Cena. I think it's where that might have been where he debuted the White Power Ranger outfit. Yeah. Which unfortunately they didn't use that image on the card. If there was one thing I could have fixed on that card,
that's
just
a top
use that
thing.
image.
Topps has screwed up so much stuff with wrestling. It's ridiculous.
Panini's there too. So
yeah, we'll get into that next year.
Oh yeah. I know. Have fun with that when you're getting sticker autos of Lash LaRue and some of those guys. But yeah, so that's pretty much all I have for wrestling. I wish I had more. It's just same thing. I wish I had more Indianapolis Colts cards, but there's only so many funds, and I've got to try and stick with my priorities.
So you think it's more so not that you're not interested or you're pushing it off to the side. It's just you're so focused on Pacers stuff.
Focused on Pacers and
your Hall of Fame rookies.
Yeah, Hall of Fame rookies. And then there's just only so many funds. So
sure.
I have to make sacrifices. I did consider doing an autographed set at one point, not a certified autograph set, but like chasing an autographed set of the 1999 Topps WCW NWO Nitro.
Oh,
so
yeah.
I did the same thing with a 70s basketball set. It took me 9 years and I finished it. But I started looking at the set and I'm like, well, all these cards are dark. I hate getting cards signed in silver. And then like shockingly, like more of the wrestlers from the 99 set were dead than the 72 basketball set, which is really sad.
Tells you something about the wrestling business.
Yeah. I mean, obviously completely different circumstances there, but it's like, do I really want to shell out, tons of money for Canyon, and some of these guys, no disrespect to Canyon, but some of those guys you wouldn't expect to be the cost of some of the bigger names.
Something interesting you brought up that's a difference between sports cards and maybe I'm wrong and you can correct me, but something I've seen is the sports card world wants certified autos, be it sticker or on card, only on card. Wrestling is totally different. Like if you get your late 90s WCW cards you were talking about, hypothetically, you get that signed, not even graded, send it to PSA just for authentication. There's still going to be a huge demand for that. Like there's a difference in wrestling cards where people love hand-signed base cards. Have you seen that as well?
Yeah, it used to be with basketball that you were actually, if you had a valuable card, you were devaluing it by getting it signed. That stigma has changed, I would say, over the last 5 or so years. We're not fully there yet, but people, especially like rookies, people are a lot more in tune with that. Maybe they just got bored with what the manufacturers were doing, or maybe the manufacturers weren't doing as good of a job, and people realized like, hey, this card looks really great hard signed. Why didn't I do this years ago? So I've been on board with that for a while. I'm not tooting my own horn. That's just my personal preference. But part of why I've been on board with that is because I was doing a lot of in-person autographs of different sports. So that was always something that was interesting to me.
Yeah, maybe it's just a shift of mindset. There's so many people in it now that people are like, hey, we're not going to let these people who've been doing it for 30 years tell us how to think. Like I even I've seen numerous people getting paint pen slabbed signed. Like it might be not a very valuable card, but maybe it's something they picked up, for, a fraction of what it would actually cost them to grade it. And they're just like, hey, I just get the slab with a paint pen and then put, the sleeve over the slab, so to speak. So going back into wrestling cards, I ask almost every guest this, especially the ones that are not like diehard wrestling fans. Like, what do you think it's going to take to get wrestling cards into the mainstream? And what I mean by that is like on the same level as F1 and Pokemon and all these other fringe things. There's huge money out there. And somebody we both know, Drake's PC, he's officially purchased the highest selling wrestling card in raw format in the history of wrestling cards.
Was that the Rock one?
No, there was a Vince McMahon Superfractor.
Okay, yeah, he bought the Vince McMahon
from Transcendent. Cool. So, there's people out there that are in both the sports card world and wrestling that are starting to shell out some big money, and not from a pump and dump aspect, from just a respect aspect. There are a lot of hobby platforms that'll say, okay, this wrestling card sold for this. All right, so let's talk about golf. They're just like shoot over it. So what do you think it's going to take to kind of change that mindset? I know Gary Vee's done a lot of work. I'm doing as much as I can to just like get the information out there. Where are we at on that?
I think it relies kind of outside of cards too. Like if wrestling itself could become more mainstream, and that sounds kind of goofy because WWE is almost too mainstream. But I mean mainstream as in relevant, because I don't really feel like WWE is all too relevant right now.
Sure.
And I'm not anti WWE. It's just not, it's not a product I enjoy watching. But maybe, I thought maybe if there's like another mini wrestling war with AEW and WWE, I think that will, lift all the other boats, so to speak.
Right.
Ring of Honor's kind of maybe getting phased out. Like maybe things are starting to move towards, we've got these two big companies going one-on-one, and AEW's got the working relationship with everyone, it seems like.
Right.
So I think it'd have to get mainstream on that level first. The thing about Pokemon not so much Pokemon, but like Marvel and Formula One, I think a lot of people are getting into these things because that's where the playing field is more level for them. Right. Like they don't have a legacy collection of basketball, baseball, and football to be able to kind of play on that same playing field. But guess what? We all entered, I didn't, we all entered Formula One on this same level. So I don't know how many people are actually interested in Formula One that are buying Formula One. So you want to be careful, because if people start buying wrestling in that way, it is not good for you guys that are the true collectors, because yes, the value of your cards will go up, but you're not selling them.
Right.
You might sell your duplicates. That's the same thing I ran into with basketball. Oh, my collection value went up. Great. Well, I'm not selling it, so it doesn't really matter.
That's another real tough thing with wrestling right now, is there's so many people who, once these things get into their collection, they're never going to see the light of day. Like I'm the opposite. Like I have a handful of things like that, but I like to sell as much as I like to buy, because I use the selling to fund the buying, because, I want a bunch of like higher end stuff. And we're getting to the point in wrestling where a lot of the vintage stuff for the average person is starting to get, it's creeping up there slowly, and it's getting to where it's almost unattainable for some people. But I think this whole Panini thing is going to bring in a new audience. I think there's going to be, you've got the Prism Boys out there, the Flippers are going to be out there. And I think we need everybody on board to kind of make the markets and economy work of the cards, even though, we kind of frown upon certain aspects. But I think there's going to be a whole new crowd with Panini coming in.
It's definitely an ecosystem. I mean, there is a place for those people. I sell cards, I'm not against that. But it's all in their motivations. Like, do you enjoy the cards? If you can't sell them and you get stuck with them, are you happy?
Yes.
And you just got to be careful with that. And also with wrestling, the vintage wrestling, from what I can see, I really can only think of one set. Is that correct? I mean, just that main 82 set.
There's the 82, 83 All-Stars is big. We have the 1985 Tops, which is the first Topps wrestling set and the first official WWF
Oh, that's the
product.
one with the quote unquote Vince McMahon rookie.
Yeah, it's related to that. Yeah, and then
Okay.
there's even people. I mean, it makes me feel old considering it vintage, but the 2002 Royal Rumble set from Fleer
Yeah. Well, I
has
mean, it's got Orton and Cena and all those
Brock.
guys.
Yeah,
That's their quote unquote rookies. So,
right.
well, I know that's debatable from listening to
Oh
shout
boy,
out Brett
yeah.
and Stacking Slabs. Now I know that's a debatable thing.
That's another thing. Maybe it's with a lot of the sports stuff, we have like legitimate rookie cards, and with wrestling, like we've got Upper Deck is going to be putting out the AEW cards soon,
Right.
hopefully. And they've already said we're not putting rookie card logo on it because even for Upper Deck, it's becoming too hard to determine.
Yeah.
Is this the person's first card? Was it in a different gimmick? Were they in the indies? So maybe that's another thing with wrestling cards. It's harder for people to get into it. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that definitely could be something.
So moving on to like your style of collecting, which we've touched on a little bit, and I think that's going to really help wrestling fans. And I say that because they're in the wrestling card space. There's not as many people that are like throwing thousands of dollars out and willing to flip and wheel and deal and trade and stuff like that. Most of them are collectors at heart. So I think your style of collecting and the way that you can acquire your cards, which we'll get into in detail, I think it can really help some of the wrestling card collectors out there. So I'll just give you the floor to start on that.
Yeah, I kind of like to have I had a guest on my show, and he kind of explained something that I had been doing, but I didn't like formally realize it until that. His name was Alex Connell Collection on Instagram. He developed this like pyramid, basically a priority pyramid. He's like, look, if I'm going to buy something and it's not in my pyramid, then I'm probably off task.
Makes
it's
sense.
Probably not a great use of my funds. Now, do I adhere to that 100%? No, because I have a Seth Rollins matte auto.
Sure.
But for the most part, it's like, okay, I value Pacers cards. I value NBA Finals relics. I value historical cards, historical sets. So if I can find, especially if I can find cards that overlap into multiple tiers, I know that's a card for me. And I feel good buying that. I feel like it's a responsible buy. If I'm buying stuff outside of that, it's a little tricky because, it's like, well, am I just getting impatient? Do I just love the dopamine rush of a mail day too much? Am I going to appreciate this when it comes in, or do I just like tracking it better? That's that's a problem. Yeah. If you just enjoy tracking your cards better and I'm guilty of that. In fact, I kind of reach times of the year where I need to scale back. So that's kind of what I try to do. I also, being a team collector, it lets me get cards from multiple decades from different sets and different styles of cards. So like, I don't have to feel pressured if I want a 2009 National Treasures RPA like the Steph Curry. Well, I can buy the Tyler Hansbrough, who's the Pacer,
right,
for a lot, way cheaper, and I can have a sample of that set that fits my collection, that fits my little pyramid, and it's the set is historic in nature. So that's kind of what I try and do. So maybe if you like The Rock, that would be something where you pick up his early stuff. I know there's the 97 Cardinal or whatever.
There's that. Yeah. There's a lot of
so
of
anyway,
stuff
yes,
out there.
but that and then now he's up to products until now. So you get you get over 20 years worth of products where you can pull cards from The Rock. And the wrestling, it's a little different because there's not teams and there's not, you don't have guys that are around for so many years, but there are legacy cards too. And there's cards of Hall of Famers and legends and so on.
Yeah. One thing that I've taken from you is the team collecting aspect. And I've been trying to tell people forever in wrestling cards, like player collecting is where it's at. And that it's affordable if you're not picking, Hogan, Rock, Steve Austin, right, Vince. So I've been trying to push it out there, and I've started seeing people doing it. They're latching onto these, these superstars that maybe they have a connection with, whatever that is, whether it's nostalgia, right, whether it's somebody they actually watch in the modern product. And you can go out and start getting rainbows of these things for, a fraction
right,
of the cost of what some of the graded, Hall of Fame rookie cards are. So do you see the correlation there with the team collecting and that? And would you have any advice? Because the biggest thing that I advise people to start with the player collecting is because it is an affordable way to have fun and still be in it and not, we see these big mainstream cards, whether it's wrestling or sports, flashed around. And I think a lot of people just get turned off with that because they can't afford it, or maybe they're just not interested. And I'm like, this is a way to keep doing it and have some fun.
Right. Yeah. And I think in wrestling, probably the player side would be more practical. And it allows you to learn all of the parallels too. That's another thing.
Yes.
So like, I'll throw a random name out there. I doubt, maybe I'm wrong, I doubt there's a Brodus Clay collector out there.
That'd be interesting if there was.
So maybe if you are, contact Zhan,
awesome.
Let him know.
Yeah.
But if you really like him, and I know they're not making him, I think he's in NWA now. They're not making him in current products. But if you really like him, you could probably go buy as long as you can find him, you could buy all of his nicest cards for, I'm sure, under $500, like
Sure.
every single one of them. And you could learn all about the parallels from, 2015 Chrome or whatever sets he was in, and have a pretty cool looking, collection in the process. And it would be very unique because I'm pretty sure there's going to be nobody else out there that has that.
Right. And something else that you touched on just then, you said you could buy all of them for $500. Many people would look at you and some of the Pacers cards you're buying, and I won't say the Hall of Fame rookies, mainly the Pacers stuff, and they'd be like, why are you throwing your money away? This is not a good, quote, investment. Right. And some other people out there are like, well, why should I start player collecting somebody that WWE could potentially cut next week? Right. And my answer to that is usually like, as low as some of this stuff is, I don't think you're going to lose money. But even if you're not, it's still a pretty cheap way to be in the hobby, be entertained, and have some fun. What's your opinions on that? Because I'm sure people have told you the same thing as well.
Yeah, I mean, and I tell them like, well, if I like it, I'm buying it for me. So, you buy your own collection, I'll buy mine, and we'll be happy at the end of the day. If I buy things that, that I end up not liking in the future, then I'm the one that has to deal with that. That's what I'll let people know. But hey, like we talked about Matt Cardona earlier. Well, if somebody was a huge Matt Cardona fan and they were buying his stuff, and then he had this resurgence year, it's a win-win for them. But even if he didn't, if they bought it because they had great memories of him being the Z, the real life or whatever his show was, internet champion, if they had great memories of that, then so be it.
So, yeah, that's something that's interesting. Do you think that maybe the wrestling's a little bit different? I don't know about you, but I think like people go back and watch wrestling, whether it's promos, pay-per-views. Yeah. They don't really do that with sports. And I've asked several people and gotten opinions. I'm like, how much do you go back and watch your favorite team's, playoff appearance from 3 years ago? Or, Super Bowl may be different, or NBA Finals may be different, World Series. But for the most part, sports fans don't go back. So I'm like, find something you can kind of latch onto that reminds you of something that it then becomes the chase of the collection and not necessarily what this person is doing at that moment. Do you see the parallels there?
Yeah, actually, I hadn't thought of that before. I like that because for me, instead of going back and watching the games, I try and buy cards that represent the games.
Yeah.
Because going back and watching the games I don't like watching games after they've ended. Now, wrestling, on the other hand, I can go back and watch.
Yep.
It's a lot more consumable that way. So, and I mean, also the WWE Network, I don't know the state of it now, but I subscribed to it for a couple months when it first came out just to watch some old WCW. And that was fantastic. It's an amazing resource. And I figure they're only adding stuff to it from here on.
So let's transition into the keeping up with the patches. And I'm just going to let you, because there's a lot of people probably watching and listening to this that don't understand what we're talking about. So I'll let you give the floor, and then I'll kind of compare that to wrestling.
Okay. So in sports cards, there's something that's happened more so in the past where there are these cards called rookie patch autographs, and it's kind of just like it sounds. It's a rookie year card with a piece of a patch from a photo shoot, although it's still very valuable, even though it wasn't worn in a game, and an autograph. And these have kind of become the staple rookie card to chase. Even, like a Steph Curry is worth like, twice my house, 3 times my house. Right. I don't know what it's at now. So it's insane. So There was a point though where if you got like a weak patch on these, there were some crooked people that would switch the patches out because the nicer patches carry a premium. So there's always people that, it's hard for people to imagine that now because a low grade with a bad patch will still sell for more than my house.
Right.
But times were different. People say, well, why would somebody switch that patch out? Well, the incentive was there. Unfortunately, it's, evil, it's crooked, right? But the incentive was there. So that became a big deal with basketball cards. And at some point, somebody said, someone should be tracking these. A lot of people were saying someone should be tracking these, myself included. Someone should be tracking these. And finally, I just decided, you know what? I've studied this a lot. Why don't I do it? And it was a fairly big undertaking, but I'm a teacher. So I was able to spend part of one summer really piecing all that together. And since then, I've tried to keep up with it. And some other people have helped with it as well. But basically, I try to track every transformation that these high profile cards have gone through to try and look out for collectors and investors too.
Right.
There are investors in this game that are good people, and I believe it's helped them as well. And I think that's a good thing. And I think it's prevented a lot of this from happening here on out. At least I'd like to think it has.
Yeah, and similarly to wrestling, the best resource we have is WrestlingTradingCards.com that Tony Vella has archived, and there's other people that have helped him out. But it's kind of doing the same thing, putting print runs and putting, where were these things officially printed? Were these, quote, bootleg? Like there's so much interesting things in wrestling. For example, he has a box of cards that there's supposedly 299 printed, and he counted them. There's 299 in there, I believe. However, he personally knows like 3 other people that have them. So, right. These independents are not putting the foil stamps of hand numbering, that kind of stuff. So right. There's this, and autographs are the same way, especially like modern WWE tops kind of getting, they lost the license. So they're trying to get this stuff pushed out. Well, there's now some people that are saying, hey, this autograph doesn't look anything like what he or she has signed their entire year. What's going on here? There's legitimacy of even graded, authenticated autographs now within the wrestling card hobby. People like, questioning stuff like that. So right. I thought it was interesting.
These are growing pains. That's a good thing to an extent.
Yeah. The people out there that are doing what you do with the patches, doing it with wrestling cards, I think is fantastic. And it's also, for me, like if I really wanted one of those expensive patch cards like you're talking about, I'd probably go after it. Or maybe it was something that fits something I collected, I'd probably go after it. That's kind of what I would preach to do in wrestling. But I just hope that people aren't sinking a ton of money into this before doing the work. So I think that's what you're trying to do. And that's what the wrestling card community is trying to do by pushing just the legitimacy, because there's a lot of reprints, there's a lot of bootlegs, not so much the patch aspect, which I'll get into in a minute on that. But with wrestling cards, it just seems like it's legitimacy of autos and legitimacy of print runs, which do you see that as much in basketball cards, or is it mainly just the patch swapping that's the problem?
Mainly the patch swapping, although there was the big Luka Doncic autograph conspiracy. Yeah. There are some Shaq autographs that are very much in question that I think are bad from Panini for years. And I went into that on an older episode of my show, but those are the main things that I see. I'm definitely intrigued by this wrestling stuff, though. I got to go dig. I
don't know if you want to. It might give you a complete headache because of how spread out it is.
Well, I know. I feel like I follow Tony on Twitter. I'm not sure if I actually do. I think maybe it might be your retweets, but either way, I got to take a look at that.
And then back to the patches. So you said you got the Seth Rollins. Was it fully loaded, right?
Yeah,
the mat. And many people have been talking about the relevance of that too. I think there's and this as well as I do with basketball, there's so much crap out there that's just like a t-shirt or a jersey or something. Right. And you can't pinpoint what exactly that is. For some superstars or athletes, that doesn't even matter. If you've got a LeBron, even if it's photo shoot player worn, it's still going to have a huge demand for that. Same thing with The Rock or Vince or Triple H or whoever, tippy top. But then there's these other things, and I like to relate them kind of like what you said with your Seth Rollins. I think I don't remember forgive me, and I should be the wrestling historian here, but the WrestleMania in Canada where The Rock and Hogan faced off.
Is that 19?
I think it was either 18 or 19. I never can remember. but they have relics out from that mat of that pay-per-view. And some of the relics don't even have that. It may be the wrestlers that wrestled on that card, but they're not the biggest signification of that event. So I'm like, telling people, hey, go out and buy these mat cards. And they're like, oh, well, it's just a mat card. There's thousands of mat cards out there. I'm like, yeah, but this specifically states it's from this event. And that's a huge historical piece. Like going back, maybe picking up pieces of WrestleMania gear or pieces of SummerSlam. Do you see the correlation between that and the finals patch collection that you're working on?
I do. Yeah. And I think, some people in basketball are starting to pick up on that. I want to talk about it because I'm interested in it, but at the same time, it's like I kind of wanted to keep it on the DL because I could buy that stuff reasonably. Now it's getting a lot harder. I have wondered a little about the wrestling stuff though, because it said like the SummerSlam one says it's from an event used map from 2015 SummerSlam. Well, for all I know, that could have been the access that they had the day before. You know?
Yep.
And I just have to live with that. I'd like to pretend that, Seth Rollins and John Cena rolled all over that portion, but who knows?
I would relate it a lot to, in the, like the mid 2000s sports stuff, specifically before Panini got the license, the wording is very important on the back of that.
Right.
And that's how wrestling cards are. If it just says you've worn an event worn, blah, blah, blah. Okay. But a lot of these, especially the wrestling Fleer products, they will specifically state it was worn by this person at this event and sometimes on this date, blah, blah. So,
well, I got to be careful. I don't want to drop any names here, but I talked to
Kyle Shoot interview. Here we go.
Well, I talked to somebody that knew a wrestler's parent. I'll put it that way. And Topps had sent him a t-shirt to wear, and he's kind of just like maybe held it at the kitchen table. And I think that was kind of the extent of that t-shirt being event used. The event was that he was signing the cards at his kitchen table. So take that for what it is. And unfortunately I can't give any names. I probably shouldn't even tell that story, but
no, that's the kind of interesting information. And, you say that there's been a lot of stories about that similar to that, but with autographs, like, from what we've heard, Topps would take a lot of these cards to WCW talent, and sometimes they would get thrown away. Sometimes they would end up, the talent would actually keep them. And then they would surface again at a wrestling convention years down the road and be available for sale, even though they're official cards. Very confusing. And that's, wrestling cards is just, it's the Wild West, and it's a lot of fun to keep up with. Let's transition into content, you creating content, the Wax Museum podcast. I know you do stuff on your YouTube page as well. Just talk about what that's been like for you as far as like community engagement. And I like to call it a hobby within a hobby. So have you been having fun doing that for, however long you've been doing it?
Yeah. And I think mentioning Brett again from Stacking Slabs, he talks about how having a show is kind of a hobby hack because it is a great way for me to network with people. I mean, you and I probably wouldn't be talking right now if I didn't have a show. And like, I'm having a blast. So this is an opportunity that's come about solely because of the show. I interviewed a couple former Pacers. That's only because of the show. I interviewed the designer of the NBA logo. That's only because of the show. But these are conversations that I've wanted to have anyway. And it's just really hard to approach someone and say like, hey, will you chat on the phone with me for 30 minutes? I got some questions I want to ask you. That without a platform that goes nowhere, it's just creepy. Right. So now that I have this platform though, it's something that I can do. So I myself enjoy it, but also I'm able to share it with other people, hopefully like-minded people that enjoy it as well. So it's been a blast. It's been a lot of work. I don't know how long I'll be able to do it, at least to the capacity that I want to, because at some point all things will come to an end, but for the time being, I'm having a blast and it's been great for me and my collection.
Yeah. And one thing that's different about, I guess, your aspect compared to what we're doing is, I mean, how many basketball card content creators are there out there or generalized sports? And with wrestling, there's like a handful. And I just keep
Right.
trying to push the wrestling fans like, hey, get out there, hit the record button. Don't worry about the quality later. Just get going, because we need more people like that to kind of elevate the hobby. And something else, this is the reason why I wanted to bring you on today, and I'm trying to do this more with guests throughout the year, is I think there's a lot of people, no matter what segment of the hobby you're into, they just kind of stay in their lane as far as like learning. And if it wasn't for listening, like I don't collect a lot of modern basketball. I still buy Shaq and Rodman stuff occasionally because that was my player PC from when I was a kid, and I'm not letting it go.
Right.
But I still love listening to your show because there's so much stuff to learn. I still like listening to Brett's show, even though he may be talking about Colts cards or, Tom Brady stuff. Like there's so much to learn in these other avenues that you can then take back to your segment and kind of apply it to that. So have you had that as well? Do you kind of listen to some different things and take that?
For sure. I mean, I've listened to kind of what you mentioned, the Brady stuff, the Manning stuff, the wrestling stuff. Seeing what's happening with gold refractors with wrestling right now is fascinating to me, because you can contextualize it in this whole greater card ecosystem. So I have definitely really enjoyed that. And I know you mentioned encouraging content creators, like, please open your mail on video and tell why you bought that card.
Right.
Because I've had people all the time tell me, I don't want to do content creation because it's not going to be any different than anyone else. No, if you're talking about your collection, that's something that is distinct and only you can provide this whole hobby. So please get out there and do that.
Right. Yep. 100% agree. Well, thanks for coming on. I think this has been a great conversation that will hopefully help the wrestling card community, because we're still getting going. There's still a lot of moving parts within wrestling as compared to traditional sports. And I think a lot of the information you've talked about today will hopefully, spread out there to the wrestling card community and get them motivated, get them going, get them thinking differently. And most importantly, having fun with the way they can collect, and just remembering that, they don't have to have those hobby headline cards to be able to have some fun. So if you got any parting words for the community, let us know, and then let everybody know where they can find you and check out your content.
Yeah. So real quick, I would just say, do everything you can to normalize what you love. And I think other people will be attracted to that. And that's what you're doing here with this show. I appreciate the opportunity to come on. It's why I like doing shows like yours and Brett's, because it's different. I don't have to talk about just basketball. I can kind of branch out. As you can see, I do have some interest in wrestling, regardless of what I claim. So it's definitely there. So it's fun to talk about that. I put out a new podcast episode every Thursday. You can find it on all major podcast platforms. You can find me on Instagram at Wax Museum Podcast. You can find me on Twitter at Wax Museum PC. I'm trying to put out a YouTube video every 3 or 4 days, which is really just my mail and things that I find interesting. I'm trying to make it a companion to the show.
Prime example of what you talked about. Just, you're not doing anything fancy, just opening your mail.
Just opening mail. And you know what? If only 300 people enjoy it, then so be it, because that's my way of sharing in addition to the show. So once again, really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks for coming on. I'm hoping, you will be the gateway for many of the other sports card hobby platforms that we have, because a lot of people won't give wrestling the time of day, but now that we've got you through the forbidden door, as you choose a wrestling term, you and Brett, hopefully, and we'll have Drake on by the time this airs. Hopefully you guys will kind of open that door for us. So thank you again for your time. Thank you guys for watching. Well, I just got back, and hopefully nobody got hurt in the filming of this video. I want to thank Kyle again for coming on the show and spreading the wisdom that he has in his corner of the hobby, which I hope can really help wrestling card collectors. I think there's a lot of parallels between what Kyle talked about and what we can apply to wrestling cards. Links also in the show notes to his podcast as well as his YouTube page. And I want to thank again the Midnight Rider for coming on the show, good friend of mine, and helping to host the show today while I was unavailable. If you like this video, please subscribe, tell a friend about the channel. We've got some dogs making appearances, as always. And until next time, click the videos on the screen for more great wrestling card content. We'll see you.